Hi, and welcome to the 5th episode of Change Setters, the podcast where we explore the ever-evolving landscape of change management through the voices of experienced practitioners. And today we have on the podcast Adrienne Dygert and Sarah McKenzie. Welcome, ladies.
Thanks, Karen.
There's just so much to say about our guests today, guys. We have two amazing women here, and their bios is pretty long, so I'm going to read it out. I didn't learn it by heart, but bear with me for a second. This is really worth listening. So we've got Sarah McKenzie here with us. She's a Canadian living in the UK, and she's been a change leader for more than 20 years, leading change initiatives and other business improvements like performance analytics. She has a passion for using data to drive adoption and the people side of change. Sarah has worked across a variety of sectors, and she has led change in both waterfall and agile environments, which we're going to be talking about in this podcast. Sarah was a runner-up this year for the UK Change Awards for Best Change Influencer. So well done to you. That's something to be proud of, Sarah.
Oh, thanks, Karen.
And then we've got Adrienne Dygert. She's a senior change management partner. She has been a change practitioner for close to 20 years, and she has led transformational change initiatives for a variety of industries, including financial services, manufacturing, and utilities. She has recently begun focusing on culture change, and she leads a grassroots team who is introducing ways of working solutions for the new remote first work environment and the culture change to improve employee experience and wellness. Really super impressive, ladies. Thank you again so much for making the time.
Yeah,
this is great. Thanks for having us.
We're excited.
We're really keen on, on this podcast, we really want this to be a place where we feel like we're having a chat with you guys. So we want to make this really super informal. And so we just want to set the scene and start maybe by getting to know you a little bit better. So is there a book or a podcast that you're currently reading, listening to that you would like to share with us? So Sarah, could you go first, please?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a busy mom, and so making time for that is always just such a privilege. But recently I was traveling, and there's quite a few delays, so I was able to tuck into a book called Lessons in Chemistry. It's a fiction book, and it's about a 1960s housewife who's a chemist, but she is really fighting against all of the feminist barriers that are facing her in her career, and she does that through launching this world-renowned cooking show. So it's really at its root about feminism and food, which is like two of my favorite things. So Really love that.
Cool. That sounds like a nice, relaxing book to read.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks for sharing. Adrienne?
Yeah, so I've really gotten into podcasts the past few years. I live in Philadelphia and I walk everywhere. So podcasts are really nice, like while I'm walking a mile, half a mile to wherever I'm going. And there's been one that really stands out, especially from an organizational change management perspective. It's called Building Better Cultures. I listen to it on Apple, but you can probably find it on Spotify or wherever you get your podcast. But it's really great. I mean, a lot of it is around culture change, but there is so many overlaps on change management, learning, and really just how we can make the workplace better and how we can implement that change in the best way while we're doing so.
Wow, that sounds cool. Okay, I really need to write that one down. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Thanks for sharing. Right, so today we're here to talk about how to do change management in an agile perspective, in an agile kind of project. So we're going to cover that because I know you guys have a lot of experience in doing that way. And I know that change management in agile is not something that is often talked about, or not enough, I guess. So let's first start maybe with setting some foundations. I don't know if all our viewers or our audience knows what agile is. So Sarah, could you explain to us a little bit like what that is, what that means for a project?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's good to have that level set. So agile change management is really about taking small iterative changes as you go, really right from the start. And the way you do that is you understand what your stakeholders and users need. So you do that by keeping them close through the entire design ideation phase. And you're flexible throughout that whole journey. So as you are iterating and you're making small frequent changes, you're still listening, you're looking at the impact it's having, you're engaging with your users, and you're flexing. So you might have an overall vision roadmap, but you're also understanding that needs may change, so the dependencies coming in. So that really helps us to change based on what those user needs are. But it's good because it gets the changes out quickly, small amounts of changes quickly to your users. And really, for the most part, a lot of it is about like a mindset as well, rather than like a textbook.
Yeah.
So we have within, Adrian and I work together. So within our organization, we use Scrum, and that has within it a whole methodology. But we're not agile trained or qualified. It's really about taking the best of it and applying it to your work. So what that means for us day to day is you'll have daily meetings with your tech teams, with your designers and the such, and you're understanding what you're doing day to day, and you're meeting with your stakeholders day to day as well. But you have a whole backlog of work, and you're doing things like you're doing retros and you're reviewing. You're always engaging to make sure that those changes are right for users.
Wow, that's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really like the fact that you're iterating change rather than having like a big change campaign or a big block of change. I'm thinking waterfall because that's what I do the most. And we're going to talk about waterfall. But iterating change is really cool because change fatigue is such a thing in people today. Right? And that really helps, I feel, with giving a little bit of change rather than a lot of change.
It's true. Change fatigue can happen. It can happen still for stakeholders. They may feel like it's a bit constant, especially if one of our projects is waterfall, one's agile, and it's hitting them all the time in various ways. So it's still a risk that we manage, I think, overall. But if you're keeping your stakeholders close, then at least they understand the change and the benefits and what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. You mentioned waterfall. So how would you kind of differentiate or compare Agile to waterfall? Adrienne, I think you have some kind of experience in comparing those. So
yeah. So as you all had already mentioned, waterfall is sort of the traditional way, at least as long as I've been practicing change that we're doing, right? You've got this go live, you're moving towards a go live. A lot of times, if it's a technology change, for example, the product has already been purchased and it's like, this is what we're doing. There may not be a lot of room for customization. We're moving forward with this. Sorry if it doesn't work, we'll figure it out later, type of thing, right? Where Agile is like the complete opposite. It really, if you think about what Agile means, it's like, we are, as Sarah said, we're iterating, we're able to pivot. I think about this, I love analogies, so bear with me, but I had earlier on in my career, I had come in, ready to take on the world, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed at this, this company that I was at. And I was like ready to implement this change. It was waterfall, but one of the ladies who'd been there for like 30 years was like, honey, this is a big ship to turn around. And that's what I think about when I think about waterfall. Like it's a big cruise ship and it's like going towards the port. To turn it around or to make changes is going to be really, really difficult, right? So Agile is like a speedboat, right? So you're able to kind of weave, you're able to make those changes. And, along with that, the way that we practice change needs to also align with that speedboat, not sort of that clunky big ship that's, hard to turn around.
Yeah, that's so cool. I love the analogy. That really makes it easy to understand. And so what does that mean for change management exactly? How do you navigate change management in an agile way? Of course, you mentioned that there's no real huge go live, no, there's something, it's like longer term kind of goal. So what does that mean for change management?
It's interesting when Adrian and I were chatting about this. I think, as change managers, you've always kind of had an agile mindset because you can't predict what stakeholders are going to say or do or react to some of the changes or some of the dependencies you need to work through. So I think that mindset initially is there. Really practically speaking, I mentioned about keeping your stakeholders close. So say, for instance, if you're doing a change impact analysis within Agile, it may not be as big and broad and complex as you would with a waterfall change. So you might have something that's actually quite light as you move to your minimum viable product, your MVP. You might have just a smaller group that are impacted, or it might just be a smaller bit of functionality or design change that they're going to experience. So you can contain that, I think, quite neatly. So your impact analysis might be quite light. And therefore, the things that come off of that, like your comms and your training, they might just be a little bit more flexible than they would if you were trying to do some sort of big launch and you're trying to get a big group of stakeholders ready for a go live.
Right.
Adrian, what else would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, a lot of the thing too that we need to think about, and you all mentioned change fatigue, right? The way the agile environment that Sarah and I use most of the time at our company right now is, as Sarah mentioned, Scrum. So it's usually 2 to 3 week sprints. And at the end of that sprint, some sort of change is delivered, right?
Yeah.
So when you think about that and that happening, to our end users, to the employees or the customers, from maybe various different projects or what we call products and agile, that's quite a bit, right, of change for them to absorb. So a lot of times it's a bit like the 80-20 rule. You have to really discern, do we need training for this? Do we need communications? And how do we deliver this, right? Like, as Sarah mentioned, it may be different. Maybe we're doing a series of little micro learnings that can be easily digested and easily changed because we do know that we're going to continue to iterate on this product or this technology. And then another thing that's important to think about too is that, this is the way that technology is being implemented lately. Think about like Spotify or Instagram or maybe your banking application. It's like, it just changes. You log in one day, it looks completely different. And I know for me on Instagram, it'll look completely different. And like a week later, it's gone, right? And so that's like a very agile way of thinking about it. But really, when you're designing the product too, and you're thinking about that, it needs to be so intuitive that we don't really need to do as much of the training and the communications. And that's really the goal. So as change management practitioners, we're looking at change in a bit of a different way because we're really hoping that the product itself or the change itself speaks for itself. And so we're able to kind of get in there and, like I said, maneuver and pivot and think about things in that mindset, as Sarah was saying, which is really, really important instead of like concrete methodology, like you have to do this, you have to do this. It's not like that at all.
Yeah. It sounds even like, it even sounds like you kind of play your change management by ear. Of course, it's not like you have like a structure, but you kind of, it depends on how the releases go and how the tech team kind of works in implementation, right? But it does sound like something, a way of working that is maybe like less stressful because you just kind of have to adapt with what's being released, right?
And there's
it's interesting. Sorry.
We're just talking. I was just gonna say it's we may even be adding the same thing, Sarah, is that there is a lot of room and it's really cool because agile fosters like an innovative mistakes are okay. This is just like our first pass. And so that is less stressful in a way because it's like, okay, let's just see if this works.
We're trying it out.
Let's listen to the feedback and then we'll iterate based on what we're hearing.
Yeah, I was going to say it can be more scrappy, right? So, you might have your overall plans and approach around it, but you need to flex and change that. And we are always dependent on we've got a fantastic tech team, designers that we work with, who have that intuition and they understand that our products will be quite intuitive. And oftentimes the work that we're doing is with the business side, looking at the impact of that. And it may impact, say, processes and procedures in a regulatory environment. So you need to make sure that you're understanding all of that. So the product almost takes care of itself sometimes, but then you need to look at what that means to people who use it day to day in their own work.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to what you were saying, Sarah, in the beginning, how important it is to have your stakeholders really close to manage expectations, right? I don't want to get into, I think we're going into the next part of our question, but I guess it's a good intro because I really want to learn from you ladies. You have so much experience in Agile. So what are the best practices of doing change management in an Agile way of working? What can you share with us today?
I'll go first, Adrian, but please jump in. So I think in terms of keeping your stakeholders close, that's probably the key thing. So you'll have your group of champions who are impacted initially, but you're going to have a wider group of people who aren't really going to care as much because they're not going to see the benefits right away. It may not impact their work. That may be coming down 6-12 months down the line.
Yeah.
So what you want to do is you want to engage with everyone. But you want to make sure that you get that group who are impacted in close. They really begin to champion the change and what they're seeing. And then you can use their voices as ever. We know influencers are so important in change management that we can use those people to then talk about the product and go, well, it helped me with my work in this way. And then you can start to see what the benefit will be when it comes. And you also need to really share. I think it's probably a bit of a perception that Agile is completely, agile. And it is, but you need to make sure you've got an overall roadmap and vision, right? You know where you want to be over the next few years. So you want to be able to share that vision with people as well. And they'll understand, yeah, that's a great bit of feedback you've given me. And that's in our backlog and our to-do list for the next 6 months or so. So you want to make sure that that's really clear to them when those changes will come and when that'll impact them.
Yeah, I can imagine like if this is a project of like a 1 year or 2 year, like long term, that people that are not impacted directly, they can completely lose like track of this, like not even knowing where we're at and where you're going with this communication, Sarah. What do you mean with this? I can understand how that is just so important.
And you'll get that tipping point at some point where you're going to have a bigger majority who are impacted. Yeah. And that's really exciting as well, because then you can really ramp up a lot of your communications and engagement with bigger groups and start doing things like demos, office hours to big groups who are going to start paying more attention to it because they're impacted by it.
Yeah.
And I'll just add on to this. Oh, I'm sorry, Karen. That one of the things that I have learned along the way is that it's really important in your communications to your end users, to your customers, to the employees, to educate them and make sure they understand that this is iterative, right? So if you don't, a lot of times Sarah and I, we are focused on global technology changes right now, right? So our changes are strictly technology, and technology, we are using Agile. We live and breathe Agile, but someone in the organization that is going to experience the change might not have any idea what Agile is or understand that. So they may get something and be like, oh, is this it? Like, this isn't great, right? So we have to really think about that, continuously educating in our communications, not by necessarily needing to teach them the terminology of Agile, but just helping them understand of like, this is the first pass, we're listening to you, and we're going to keep iterating and getting better as time goes on.
That's so good. That really makes sense, like educating our audience. Yeah, that's really good addition. Any other best practices you would like to share with us?
I think that in terms of your outputs from your impact assessments and the work that you're doing, your training and communications, they'll take different guises, I think, in Agile. So probably less, say, for instance, training, less classroom-based formal training about big processes and different ways of working. And it is more about, okay, we're going to do a quick demo, or we're going to do a really quick video or share this around the team meetings and the such, just to get so people can understand, okay, those are the buttons you click, this is what you do, that's great. This is what it means to me in my day-to-day work, and letting them ask questions. So kind of having that more flexible way of delivering your training, your communications is really key. One thing I know, for instance, if you're developing, say, a SharePoint site, it might be quite bare minimum to begin with, right? You might have a few FAQs, you'll have the basics, you'll have some key information, and that will build. And what we're seeing right now with a lot of our products is building into kind of lots of big hubs of information where our key stakeholders can go. And you can start to really target that around different roles that we know we really need to make sure are informed about the changes. So that's been a nice way to see that journey build with some of our communications and engagement work.
Yeah, it's a great way to support people through the change as well, like having that SharePoint site or just a website and an intranet section, right?
Yeah.
That's really. I have a question in Agile, because in Waterfall, we have this go live, right? We have this ultimate goal, this date. We know who's going to be impacted by a certain date. And what we do, my team and I, we do a lot of gamification. We do contests and we do all kind of crazy stuff to get people to adopt what we're doing. Do you guys do that as well?
Yeah, we do that. I mean, I think gamification is an amazing way to get people engaged and just introduce something that's a little bit fun into some environments that might be a little bit more, dry and monotonous. Not saying it is at our company or anything, but and I think that with gamification, that's also a really cool way to kind of when you're on that iterative sprint to like maybe do a little mini gamification and kind of keep people's attention that way. Or if you wanted to do less gamification, there is a point where, the product becomes stable, right? So maybe that's the time that you do the gamification, or maybe you do it at what we call the MVP, which is, minimal viable product, that very first introduction of sort of your proof of concept, your very first, this is what we're doing. Maybe that's when the gamification comes in if you're looking for more of just like a big bang for that. But I think it's still a great way, to be able to help people learn and get people engaged and communicate the change.
Yeah. I've likewise used that a lot in the past. Anything you can do to get people to engage in a session is great. And whether that's something super fun or just something that prompts them along, like even like a Teams poll or something like that, just to get the people who are quiet in the background doing something and also get some data from that as well, which is always good. But yeah, anything just make sure, because it's all online for the most part. So it's really trying to make sure that you've got that resonance with people and that they're paying attention to what you're saying.
Yeah, I think those are the two challenges that me and my team face the most at the moment, is just like working remote.
Yeah.
Practically constantly, and creating connection with people, because change management is about connection in the end. It's about, listening, understanding people, seeing where they're at. There's that and another one I've just missed. Getting people still interested due to change fatigue, because there's just so much change constantly all the time in all areas. Like, you guys work in technology, but there's definitely other changes happening in the company at the same time. So we are always looking into ways to kind of grasp people's attention while being away, or sometimes while being in a different time zone from people, and still trying to connect somehow,
Yeah, that's a good point. There's a couple things there. I think Agile helps with when you're building a credible product, and people will listen when they see that. And then if you come back with another change, they'll know that you can deliver things that work and that they want. But that takes a bit of time as well. The other thing I found that helps with it is when you're working with a lead across a different business unit or a site or, different office, if you can engage with them on things that also benefit them from other areas. So if you have a wider perspective of what's going on across the business and you understand that, and you're not just coming in just with your product and just that sole vision, that you kind of understand what's going on across and the other pressures they have, the dependencies, you can help out a bit in other areas. That always, I think, wins people over a little bit too.
That's a good tip.
Good
tip.
It's helped.
All right. Are there any other best practices worth mentioning?
Yeah, I would add, this isn't specifically to change management, but it's more of just thinking in agile squads or teams, right? Is really important. It goes back to Sarah's point about it really being a mindset. So I think at our company, we've been doing agile for about 3 years, maybe 4. So forgive me if I didn't say that correctly, right? And there, as change practitioners, we know that there is a change within the organization that is happening to be able to adopt agile. And so I think what we saw is at the beginning, it was like hard and fast. Okay, we're doing agile just like this. It was sort of structured. And I think that we've really learned that doesn't always work. Maybe it's hybrid. Maybe we're taking in little pieces that we've learned from agile. We have this saying in the US, I don't know if it's like, global, but we say like fitting a square peg in a round hole, right? Like you don't want to force something that doesn't work. And this also, there's so many factors in deciding, how that goes. And I think that, one of the things too is, a payroll project, for example, you may not want to iterate on someone's pay. It's just not an appropriate way to do agile, right? So really having that discernment and that flexibility, assuming that the organization is aligned with that and the culture is aligned with that, I think that's really, really important when we look at agile.
It's really, it all goes back as well to thinking like, should we do agile or should we do waterfall?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not applicable in every scenario, in every kind of project we're doing. It's really cool.
But there's also ways that I think you can apply that agile mindset to your work day to day, whether you're working on a change project, waterfall, whatever it is, managing staff, leading. You can do that kind of little and often in terms of communication and engagement. If you've got a piece of work, does it have to be perfect before it goes out? Maybe not, so how do you just show progress and then listen and engage and make it better? So that's something I've really learned through Agile, that let's just do that. And it feels better to get the work out and to share that with everyone.
Yeah. I really like Agile. Just the thought of sometimes it's just not perfect, but you're trying anyway, right? We're all in the same boat, to go back to Adrian's analogy. We're all in the same boat.
It's the whole failing forward thing, like you are still moving forward as you do it.
It really fosters innovation and collaboration, and just this idea of like you said, failing forward. I think there's so many more ideas that come out because of that. So it is a really cool thing. And the other thing I'll add about Agile that I love that OCM was already doing already, but now that it's embedded in the methodology to see people really understand this and buy in, is this continuous user feedback. We're always talking to users and listening and implementing. And I think that's just so important. Like you said, Karen, human side of change, right? Like that's what we're doing. Let's talk to these humans, and then let's make the appropriate changes based on the human interaction.
Yeah. I read this study from, I think it was Gartner, from 2017. So it's not as recent anymore, but that study did say that people nowadays, they don't want their managers to tell them what to do or how things need to be done. People want to be independent and kind of be able to pitch in. And I think that Agile does that pretty well, because as you're choosing champions, you're choosing people from the business who will be using the tool, who will be part of the project from the start and will be able to even be, deciding whether the button is right or left, whatever, but who's just part of the process. And I think it's a big part of change management as well. It's more modern. It just feels more modern sometimes.
Yeah, exactly.
It does.
It's really cool. All right. I don't know if you guys still have something to share around best practices. If not, we can move on.
I just will add one thing, and I think it's a pretty tough one, and it's just regarding your data and your KPIs. Because I think that really will drive the improvement. And also, you want to be able to measure that return on your investment in the business. So I'd say, again, be flexible with your data as it comes in. So you won't necessarily have a full satisfaction measure across all of your user base. You may not have all the data you need, but build it as you go, and that picture will develop. You'll know what you'll need, in terms of and measuring that ROI. But you want to make sure that you build that as you go, and it's okay if you don't have it all to begin with.
So does that mean then your KPIs change throughout the project? Is that what you're saying?
They could evolve. Yeah, absolutely. Especially if you have new features and the such that come on, and then you've been using your feedback from your users to want to make sure that you are developing that. So you absolutely could have new ones come in.
Makes sense. That's a really good one. I think KPIs are always the hardest part in change management. In theory, it's beautiful, but in reality, it's a hard metric. We're talking about people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and perceptions change and they're messy, right? So it's just really, it's a good gauge, and you want to make sure you're lining it back into how the business is achieving.
Yeah, that's a really good, very good best practice. Thanks, ladies. I think this conversation has been so insightful, even for me. I mean, we had a chat before this podcast, obviously, but even now I'm still learning and things are ticking in my brain. So that's good news. As we're closing in towards the end of this podcast, I wanted to, again, take advantage of your 20 years of experience and ask you guys whether you had one tip or one piece of advice you would give to a young me doing change management. Yeah, go ahead. Adrienne, do you want to start?
Oh, sure. Yeah, my tip, man. So I think that, change management is amazing. I actually love my job. I'm so passionate about it. But I will say that there are some frustrations that come along the way, which is not like any other job, right? But for me, I think one of the frustrations is it's not always the end users or the customers that are going to be receiving the change that, when I tell people about my job, they're like, oh, that sounds so hard, like getting people to change. And I'm like, what? A lot of the challenge of my job, which in some ways is very exciting, is getting people in the company that I'm working with on the project or product teams or the decision makers or the leadership on board, right? On board with our recommendations. That to me is probably one of the biggest challenges. So my advice would be, one, don't underestimate the impact that you're making, right? So maybe all of your recommendations aren't taken. That doesn't mean that you haven't already started to influence people to think a little bit different, to think in that change management, to think in that human perspective, right? And so, there is this ripple effect too. I mean, I worked on a very frustrating project once, and then it turns out that one of my coworkers decided to go and get process certified and do change management, right? So even just that, or I'll hear people who might have been resistant on a project team, and then they're like saying something about user experience later, and I just like hear them, I get really excited because I'm like, we're already kind of like, changing their mindset a little bit. And so I think a lot of what we do is teaching, even though our main job is to manage the change and influence adoption and, minimize disruption, we are actually educating the people we work with all the time. And I think when you think about it that way, it sometimes can take away some of that feeling where you're like, oh, I'm not, people aren't listening, or, I'm not getting the traction that I want to on my recommendations. So just kind of thinking about it that way, I think has been really helpful for me.
Wow, that's really insightful. Yeah, I think stakeholder management is a big part of our job.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Definitely.
It's really cool. Thanks, Adrienne. Sarah, what about you?
Yeah, I would say in terms of Agile, just start now, little and often, go for it. Don't wait for perfection to move things forward. You apply it anywhere.
It's deep. It's very deep. Thank you.
That goes for life. That's like a great life. We can just use that. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. My last question for you guys, and then you're done, is who should I invite next? I'm always really keen on hearing from other experienced, change practitioners or experts in the field that have a link to change management. So who would you recommend I have next?
I can go. I've actually have two, if that's okay, Karen. I've got Margot Waldorf is based in the UK, and she is she's led the Change Awards for the first time and really ignited a spark under the change profession in the country. So I think she'd be amazing, and she's a public speaker. I think she'd be amazing as part of the podcast. And also just a personal colleague and friend of mine I used to work with called Frances Walker. And she'll probably kill me for nominating her, but she is a change expert, and she would be amazing. And her deadpan delivery, I think, would go down really well on the podcast.
Fabulous. Thanks, there. I'll reach out to those ladies. What about you, Adrienne?
Yeah. So actually the podcast I mentioned at the beginning of the show, Building Better Cultures, there's one podcast that stands out that I listened to. It's actually from 2022. And there is a guy on there. His name is Dan Sodergren. And I'm like, obsessed. I'm a fangirl now. Like, it was just the most brilliant podcast ever. He was talking really about, I at the beginning, you mentioned, Karen, that I'm really interested in like this new way of working and innovating around hybrid and remote work, and culture change has been something I've really, really been passionate about. And that's really where a lot of his bread and butter is. He's been called a futurist. So he's really forward thinking about how we can, change cultures. I think he delves a lot in AI as well. And so he's really just like, and also very entertaining as well. So I would definitely recommend reaching out to him and getting him on the podcast.
Thank you. That's so cool. Really excited already. But thank you, ladies, once again, for making the time and coming here. And thank you to our audience for listening to our 5th episode on Agile and change management. So thank you all, and stay tuned for further episodes.
Thank you, Karen. This was fun. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye, Jane. Bye, Sarah.